Hi everyone, Matt back with another video, and today we're going to be looking at just some interesting patterns and connections related to the year 2024 and just the general years ahead in the time period that we're looking at. Some of this will be review for people who have been following this content for a little while, but I'm also hoping to kind of just have this be a refresher and also just see a couple new interesting connection points. One of the first things I wanted to cover is a pattern that we see with Noah's age in Scripture, and just seeing some of the potential encoded information that God may be providing with that. So it's basically Noah's age can is either directly identified or can be inferred, or determined, if you will, in a few different places in Scripture. We'll just go through those and take a look and see kind of why these would be significant. So Noah was 480 years old when the flood warning was given. So basically, in Genesis 6:3, God says, yeah, basically he won't always suffer the violence of mankind. Their days will be 120 years. It's actually kind of a double prophecy because it's talking about the years until the flood, but it's also talking about the number of jubilee years that God would give mankind in total. 120 times 50 is 6,000. That's the 6,000 appointed years for mankind. But if we just take the 120 years, we subtract that from Noah's age of 600, that would be 480 years. We see in the genealogy in Genesis 5 that Noah was 500 years old when his sons were born. We know in Genesis chapter 7 that Noah was 600 years old when the flood began. And then in Genesis chapter 8, we learned that basically he was, at the end of the flood, he was a year older. What we find interesting about that is that 480 equals 20 times 24, which is a way to, creatively represent the year 2024. 500 represents the year 2025. And again, I think there's significance to that, potentially more related to Israel than potential to the church. But at any rate, that's definitely good that's being identified here. And then 600 is 20 times 30, which again is a way to represent 2030. We add one more, we would end up with 2031. And so we have these interesting bookend years identified in the age of Noah when we break it down. With what I find interesting is that we see two bookend years of 2030 and 2031, which, if we look at my original chart, was kind of the transition years, 2030 and 2031, between the end of the tribulation and the kind of the start of the millennium, if you will. Again, that's for this secondary timeline. Remember, there's actually two timelines involved. I cover that in my video, though, at Terry. If you guys are new to the channel, I recommend going back and watching that, because the concept of two different timelines will be very foreign if you haven't kind of been tracking with some of the other studies that we've done. To summarize, though, basically, there is an event that is concealed in the seven thunders where God is essentially going to rewind his astronomical clock, if you will. And the reason he's going to rewind it is because the anniversary of the flood in 2022 was the actual appointed day for the Lord's return. However, as Jesus told us in Matthew 25:5, the bridegroom would tarry. And then obviously Habakkuk 2:3 talks about the vision would tarry as well. There's many other places that talk about, it says, though it tarry, it will not tarry. And that's because God is going to tarry. But when the rapture, the start of the tribulation, when that event, which is concealed in the seven thunders, finally occurs, God is essentially going to rewind his astronomical clock so that it's basically positionally equivalent to 2022. So essentially 2022 is going to occur twice, at least positionally or astronomically speaking. We see a reference to the earth being moved out of its place here in Isaiah 24:20, which is a way to encode 2024. In reverse, it says, the earth shall roll to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage, and the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it. And so, anyway, I'm not going to go through this whole chart right now. This is kind of review, but essentially, we also see a reference to whose voice then shook the earth, but now he hath promised, saying, once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. That's that heaven shaking event of God essentially rewinding his clock, if you will, so that even though it tarried, it will not tarry because it'll be still, at least positionally speaking, according to God's astronomical clock, on the appointed time. But with that said, when we track the two different timelines, we have the original timeline, which should have ended in 2028. But when you get the time shortened timeline, which will basically be initiated with the Seven Thunders event, we can see that the end is actually this overlap period between 2030 and 2031, identified here. And that is basically what we see identified in the age of Noah as well. We have 20 times 30, 600, and we add one more year, get 2031. And so, anyway, it's very interesting that we see that pattern identified for us with Noah. In previous videos, I've talked about this relationship between 2017 and 2024, and that's because God had basically marked both those years with the 2017 eclipse and the 2024 eclipse that just occurred. I think a lot of people think, that the eclipse on the 8th, nothing happened, but it was a significant marker in God's plan. Maybe in one of my future videos, I'll talk about the death of Iran's president and how that's actually related, because that came basically after the 40 days from the eclipse were concluded is when the president of Iran died, and there's actually some prophetic significance to that. That doesn't seem as earth-shaking as what I think a lot of people expected, but it is still God giving us something to track and look at, and it's really kind of related to the story of Esther. And I think actually the channel Supernatural by Design, I think that's what it's called, covers some of the connections as well. There's some other details that I've wanted to cover as well that are related to that, so maybe I'll do that in a future video. But essentially what I want to summarize here is that we know that we have two total solar eclipses that are connected between 2017 and 2024 that create the Tav, which completed the Aleph and Tav sign on the 8th. The count between those two eclipses was 24 and 22. Again, that's because the years 24 and 22 are linked. Like, we could think of, 24 essentially is the rewind point back to 22. And so we could see that just intrinsically the years 24 and 22 are linked to each other. And we even see that when we break down some of these values. For example, and this is kind of just a short diagram that we've looked at in the past. But basically, what's interesting is 2024 actually equals 4, which is the number of the door, times 22 times 23. And again, there's a countdown in God's plan known as the 2023 reversal, which overlaps with 2024. And so we would actually expect both the years 2022 and 23 to be referenced somehow with 2024. And even at a mathematical level, we see that representation. We even see it to the extent that 2024 actually equals 44 times 46, which is kind of an expanded version of these two numbers. You have 2 times 22, again, a reference to two 22s and two 23s, because you have, not only do you have the first 22, and then you'll have the reset, which rewinds, but you have 2023 going forward and the 2023 extension, which overlaps with the 2024, which is kind of another representation of, so there's essentially also two 23s. And so that's even the two 22s and the two 23s are actually mathematically captured, if you will, in the year 2024. And so this just shows God's precision in mapping this out. And again, one thing, obviously I don't put a date to this because I just wanted to illustrate the concept. This might slide further over, but basically we are currently on this 2023 extension that overlaps with 2024. I'm hoping to do a video that's going to cover, I think, how this overlap is mapped out a little bit more accurately now. But for now, I just want to kind of keep this as a placeholder in the back of our minds that when we get to the 22 reset event, God is going to essentially reset things so that the appointed day will actually speak when it's supposed to speak. One of the other interesting things too, and I shared this in one of my previous videos, is that if you just look at the number 24, the triangle number of 24 is 300, which is the value of the Hebrew letter Shin, the 21st letter, and that 21 is 3 times 7, which again is that the 3 times 7, the 37 window event of the seven thunders. And that's basically this window God identifies throughout Scripture, usually identified with the number 37 or the numbers 3 and 7. It's between two different bookends, and basically that period, that window, started in 2022. And so, again, you'll have to watch some of my previous videos to see really what the number 37 represents. But for now, if you're new to this channel, I think the only thing you need to know is that God uses the numbers 3 and 7, which sometimes is represented by 21 because it's a product of those two numbers. He basically just uses that number to identify this convergence point. So if that's all you understand right now, that's fine. I don't want to make this overcomplicated. But what's interesting when you look at when you divide the triangle number of 24 perfectly in half, you get a column of 12 at the center, and you get basically 12 squared, 12 times 12 on either side of it when you count these dots or these values up. And so you get this interesting reflection point. Again, 12 is God's number of perfect governance. It's also sometimes associated with time cycles. We can think of a day cycle, half a day is 12 hours. Jesus talks about in the Gospel of John, for example. So it's sometimes associated with that as well. But what I really want to focus on now is again going back to that connection between the years 2022 and the years 2024 to see just how really integrated this is. We can see, for example, that I'll just pull out here. If you let's start with something simple. If you look at 2024 backwards, if you just reverse it, you get 4202, which really, when you call it out, you see 42, which is, again, we've talked about that is one of the ways to represent 2022 as 20 plus 22. And if we just disregard the 0 or minimize the 0, we just see another 2. So we can think of 20 plus 22, the year 2022, twice. Again, it's that if we go back to that reset event, it's really showing that 2022, you have the first 2022 and you have the 2022 reset, which again is really connected to 2024. So you just get another way to represent that. And I like too that it's encoded in reverse because in a sense it is kind of like a rewind. The prime factorization of 2024 is interesting because you get 2 cubed times 11 times 23. And I'll just show that really quick. Here, if we look at this 2024 as a composite number, this is just a breakdown of it. We can see that the prime factorization is 2 cubed times 11 times 23. This is significant. 2 cubed is 8, but again, I think it's another way to reference the two 23s as well that we previously talked about here. The forward 23 and then the 2023 reversal, which is overlapping, the extension, if you will, that overlaps the 2024. And again, the 23 is just a shorthand way to represent those two sequences. So you have kind of 23 represented as a power there. And again, here, what's interesting, in between you have the number 11, which is a number of symmetry or reflection. And in my previous video, I actually touched on this a little bit. But basically, if you have a number chart, basically going from 0 to 9, which we can see at the top here, you go all the way to 99. So basically, it's a 10 by 10 cube. And you basically just go 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 29, etc. What you find is that you get this symmetry line of multiples of 11. So you can see that 11, 22, 33, these are all multiples of 11 diagonally. And if you go on either side of it, you also get a reflection. 21 is the inverse of 12, 31 is the inverse of 13. You can even drop down here, 63 is the inverse of 36. Down here, you can see that 76 is the inverse of 67. And so you just see this symmetry on either side. This is basically the same chart. I've just rotated it so you can see the symmetry a little bit easier, how 10 reflects 1 here, 20 reflects 2, 30 reflects 3. You can see it carried all the way down through this chart, but basically at the center line is 11 or multiples of 11. That's this symmetry point. And so what's interesting is when we do a full analysis of 2024, one of the unique factor sets in this number is the number 8 times 253. Well, 253 is the triangle number of 22, or T22. So basically, if we take 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 and you go all the way up to 22, which you can see down here, all these boxes essentially add up to 253. We would just say this is T22 because it's the triangle number of 22, but 253 is just that value. But again, 2024 equals 8, which is God's number of new beginnings or new birth. It's often associated with resurrection or the rapture. That number times the triangle number of 22. And what's really interesting about this is we have 11 as a center column here. There's 11 dots. Again, that's that number of symmetry, multiples of 11 that we were just looking at. One of God's numbers that he uses for symmetry in the middle point of this. If we break it down on either side, so we group this side and we group this side, the remaining block, if you will, is 121 and 121. And this is just very simple math. If you subtract 11 from 253, you get 242. 242 and a half is 121. What's interesting, though, is that number, 121, is 11 squared, or 11 times 11. And if we go back to this chart, 11/11/2022 was Heshvan 17, the anniversary of the flood. And so 11/11 is actually being represented, on either side here. You have the first 11/11, if you will, the first appointed day, and then again a reflection point, because remember it's going to reset. And that all of this is concealed in the year 2024. This is just something that's absolutely incredible that God has, in his absolute precision and perfection, has embedded into this relationship between 2024 and 2022, even to the extent that he identifies 11/11, the appointed day, on either side of this division, if you will. I also think it's interesting that if you go through the digits of pi, the first occurrence of 42, which again is 20 plus 22 in pi, is preceded by 253, which is the triangle number of 22. So you basically have 22 repeated twice. You have, so basically, I think it's just like at the 90th decimal point in pi, which again is 9 times 10, so we could think here 90, if we go to the axis point, that's the opposite side of the church axis, which I've talked about in a previous video. These numbers on this horizontal axis here are associated with the church. So you have 9, number of fruit, 18 is double fruit, and that's actually what Ephraim, the second-born Gentile son of Joseph's name, means. It means double fruit. It represents those who are born again. You're second-born, just as Ephraim was second-born. You add the first fruits, which is Jesus Christ, to 18. That says 18 plus 9, you get 27. That's God's number for the full church. You add 9 again, you get number 30. You get 36, which is God's number for the consummation, and really which will also lead to Israel being in the land again, the fruit of the land. So that's another instance of 9. 45 is the fruit of grace. But anyway, these are all numbers I've covered in previous videos. But the main takeaway is that this axis here, this horizontal line, all these numbers are connected to the church. And we can see it goes from 9 to 90. If we go back, like I said, this starts at the 90th decimal point in pi, and you get 253, which again is what you're looking at right here. This is 253 squares, which is the triangle number of 22. Immediately after, it follows with 42, which again is one of God's ways that he represents 2022. Basically, 42 is a clever way to take a number that is 4 digits and encode it in only 2 digits, because you could basically break it out into these 2 add-ins of 20 and 22. But anyway, I thought it was incredible that even in pi, you have basically 22. You have 22 concealed as a triangle number, and you have the year 2022 again concealed in 42. You have them back to back, which is what you would I think you would expect. Anyway, just some interesting correlations or connections there. One of the other things I wanted to talk about too is that Psalm 124. Many people are aware that the Psalms map with basically the years from the 1900 on. So like Psalm 1 would map with 1901, Psalm 14 would map with 1914, Psalm 48 would map with 1948. And again, sometimes these connections are very subtle, sometimes they're more pronounced. But if we follow that along, when you get to Psalm 124, this would actually map to 2024, because 1900 plus 124 gives you 2024. And this is really speaking thematically of a couple different things, the Ezekiel war, but also us escaping. It says, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, now may Israel say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side when men rose up against us, then they had swallowed us up quick when their wrath was kindled against us. Then the waters had overwhelmed us. The streams had gone over our soul. Then the proud waters had gone over our soul. So again, this is, still this is this is what we're actually looking forward to, or maybe looking ahead to is a better way to put it. In 2024, is this? It hasn't happened yet, but basically, this is when the start of the Ezekiel war, if you will. It says, "Blessed be the Lord who hath not given us a prey to their teeth." Again, this reference to prey is, you'll see the same language used in Ezekiel 38. Then it says, our soul is escaped as a bird out of the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken and we are escaped. And what did the Lord say in Luke? Pray that we might be able to escape these things that are coming on the earth. This is really an allusion to the rapture of the church. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. What I find interesting, again, this when we know that this maps to 2024, there are 8 verses. I couldn't help but notice that is the 8 is the multiplier for the triangle number of 22 in this case. And so we see a connection between 8 here and there being 8 verses in 124. Again, 8 is God's number of new birth, resurrection, and new beginnings. And so we can also think of Noah, for example, being the 8th man. And so that's another connection as well. Actually, maybe it's 2 Peter. I think it's verse 5. Yeah. So 2 Peter 2. So again, 22, and in a it's kind of in a symbolic way. Verse 5, and spare not the old world, but save Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. And so 8 is again a reference to that escape and to that new beginning, that new birth that would come out of the judgment or out of God's deliverance. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that we see that number built into this relationship between the year 2024, the triangle number that represents 22, and 8 new beginnings. And that we see. No, that's not what I want to go to. I'll go back to. We see 8 verses in Psalm 124. Interesting too, Psalm 24, which we could just think of as a shorthand for the last 2 digits of 2024, is also very thematically linked to coming into the Lord's presence. So if you guys want to read this on your own time, I think you'll see definitely a lot of thematic connections. What it's interesting, it ends in verse 10, which is God's number for time. And again, there is that time-related event, that reset event that we're looking forward to, that is connected to the year 2024. One thing I wanted to discuss is just some of the, I'm referencing a lot of Gregorian calendar dates, which are what I would consider the Gentile calendar, but God obviously also uses the Hebrew calendar. And when we look at the years 2023 and 2024, which again are connected, that maps to the Jewish year 5784. What's interesting is if you go to Deuteronomy, so we're going to look at Deuteronomy 32:25, which, if you guys can see down here, it's verse 5784 in the Bible, which again, 5784 maps to 2023 and 2024. And I'm hoping as you guys read this verse that you'll see that it's describing what happened, began to happen on October 7th with the horrific attack on Israel. So remember, this is 5784, and it says, the sword without and terror within shall destroy both the young man and the virgin, the suckling also with the man of gray hairs. It's kind of a grim verse, but it does actually accurately describe what happened back in October for Israel, and what they're continuing to fight against in this year, which again, this 5784 maps to both 2023 and 2024. And so again, it's just more confirmation that God, recognizes both the Hebrew, calendar years and the uh, Gentile calendar years, which would be the Gregorian calendar. One of the other things I wanted to talk about as we consider, like I mentioned, the 11 being this symmetry number. This, you see the 11 axis symmetry in this chart here, with numbers being reflected on either side. There's something that you also see that's pretty interesting when we look at Pascal's triangle. For those who aren't familiar, basically it's just a triangle where you have ones on the outside, and you take 1 plus 1 is 2, so you put that down below. And then you take 1 plus 2 is 3, so you put that down below. Then you take 1 plus 3 is 4, so you put that down below. In the case here, 3 plus 3 is 6, so you put that down below. Basically, you just keep on adding these numbers up, and you keep on going down. What is amazing about this number, though, is if you do, you're going to see that this is even connected to the number 11. So 11 to the 0 power is 1. 11 to the first power is 11, so we have 1, 1 represented there. 11 to the second power is 121, 1, 2, 1. 11 to the third power is 1, 3, 3, 1, 1, 3, 3, 1. 11 to the fourth power is 1, 4, 6, 4, 1, 1, 4, 6, 4, 1. And then it kind of breaks down after that point because, it's still kind of embedded, but it becomes less obvious or harder to see beyond this point. But at least up to this point, you can see that this relationship of this symmetry that you find in Pascal's triangle is even under the hood, has a relationship to the number 11, as we saw the powers of 11 specifically as you go across these rows. And again, so that's just a kind of a showing that 11 is connected to that symmetry line, and that's what we see here when we look at the triangle number of 2022, or 20. I'm sorry, just the triangle number of 22, which is embedded in 2024. For some, this will, I think, hopefully give you some food for thought, if you will, and some things to grab onto. Mostly, the main reason I wanted to share this type of information is just to show, on top of what has already been previously shown, that as you press into this, there's just more and more and more confirmations that God provides pertaining to these relationships. That maybe a half dozen examples, you'd say, well, it's coincidence. But once you start seeing dozens or even hundreds of correlations like this, that basically map these connections between 2022 and 2024 and the symmetry involved in the reset, it becomes very clear that at a foundational level, that God has really designed these things to be integrated or intrinsically connected in ways that are far beyond what we can comprehend. But he does allow us, at least to, as he reveals these things, see connections to some of these things. Anyway, I wanted to keep this video short. I just wanted to go over some of these connections. I'm just trying to think if I left anything out. Talked about that. Talked about the Psalms. Factors. Okay. Talked about that. Oh, so the last thing, I was going to talk about how you see the relationship between pi and e, how that's integrated in with scripture, and how you see the matching single sets of 9 and 23. I might leave this, I want to do another video that goes into the 2023 reversal a little bit more, so I might save this chart and analysis for that. So I don't think I'm going to cover that here. So anyway, with that said, sorry to take you guys down that tangent. I just wanted to see if there was something else that maybe the Lord would impress upon me to share. But I just mostly wanted to share these type of connections, just to give encouragement that God is providing even more evidence to establish these relationships, and showing just how He has encoded a lot more information we're probably aware of. Anyway, I hope this is a blessing, and I hope I will see you guys again soon. Thanks.